thought I'd put this video together just to explain how cold weather impacts batteries as a whole. Some points about why it happens, how the batteries are being managed, what to look out for, tips, tricks, and some possible solutions. Around this time every year, there's a surge in questions around, is my battery working properly? Do I have a fault? How do I maximize the performance and, I suppose, in part of that, the return of my battery setup? So I put together a set of slides that describe the problem, some of the solutions, and really talk about why this is happening. It's a combination of my own knowledge plus some official documentation provided by Fox, just to help end users and installers understand how the environmental factors affect battery performance. So let's get straight into it. How temperature impacts battery performance. So batteries work through chemical reactions. That's just what they are. We haven't yet got to a point of solid state batteries or supercapacitors. They've been promised for many years, but fundamentally behind every battery is one of probably 4 or 5 different chemistries. You heard about LiFePO4, sometimes called lithium iron phosphate, NMC, nickel manganese cobalt. There's also an aluminium equivalent to that. There's the old NiCad batteries. They're all describing battery chemistry, so the materials and chemicals that have gone into a battery that allow that battery to store and then discharge power. Each battery chemistry has pros and cons. There's no perfect battery. Now, you'll find that nearly all house batteries for solar systems are all lithium iron phosphate, called LiFePO4. And the reason for that is because they have some characteristics that work very well for most people in most environmental conditions and most installs, and for their usage. So some advantages for lithium iron phosphate are that they're a chemically stable battery, very, very low risk of thermal runaway, if even possible. At most you might get a small leak of gel, you might get some off-gassing, but they're incredibly stable and safe. You can use the full range of the battery, you can charge them daily to 100%, right down to practically empty, and in Fox example, they're very happy down to 10% as that sort of daily charge cycle. So you get that depth of discharge, as it's called, of 90%. So that's really great when you think about a solar install where you're going to be charging it up overnight or during the day, and then discharging it when the sun goes down or when demand exceeds the solar generation. And in winter time we have less solar generation, so we're relying more on charging the batteries to then discharge them during cheaper periods. But that is the trade-off when it comes to the chemistries, is whilst we've got that full usability, that 100% charge capability, very, very long cycle lives. So you'll see that most Fox products are over 6,000 cycles. That's incredibly high number of cycles for any battery. The downside of lithium iron phosphate is they are quite temperature sensitive. So when batteries start to cool below that sort of 15 to 12 Celsius level, performance and their capabilities start to slowly fade away, only temporarily whilst it's at that temperature. They're quite good on the higher end. They're quite stable until you start to go over 30, 40 Celsius, with a maximum being around 50 Celsius for most LFP batteries. But when Fox is selecting or anyone is selecting the chemistry for a battery for their product, they've got to figure out what its typical use is, what its typical environmental requirements are when it comes to temperature, what life they want out of it, how many cycles, what charging current and discharge currents they want to support, as well as that temperature band that they want it to be able to operate within. And for the UK, where most of the year it's quite mild, we have a few days, if not weeks, of slightly cooler weather for most of the UK, unless you're in a remoter region. you normally can find the batteries stay within that range where this chemistry is giving you nothing but benefits. So temperatures slow down the chemical reaction or speed them up if you're talking about batteries being too hot. If things get too cold, below a certain threshold, then the chemical reaction can get close to effectively stopping, hence why the batteries will protect themselves. What thing protects batteries? We talk about the BMS, the battery management system, that protects the batteries. Not only does it protect it from a safety perspective by having effectively acting as a fuse, but also being able to manage characteristics of the battery, and if things look like they're going out of a certain criteria, then the system shuts down. So it's that safety barrier around managing the batteries, but it also has the capability of managing the charge and discharge rates. So it will instruct the inverter to increase or decrease those amps going to or from the batteries in order to match how the battery is performing, its state of charge, the temperature, making sure that it doesn't overcharge or undercharge. These are all things the BMS look after for you, and it just does it all silently, in a selfless way. Fundamentally, home systems don't need to be monitored and managed and obsessed about, but we all do because it's interesting. We've got access to the data and the graphs, but the BMS is there to tirelessly watch over your battery stack and communicate to your inverter in order for everything to work. The number of batteries that you have in series within your installation will directly impact whether you notice or how much you notice this temperature impact. Because the charging and discharging amps times your voltage equals your kilowatts in and out of the battery that you'll be able to see on the app. If you have a smaller battery setup that's of a lower voltage, you'll be having to use more amps to get the same kilowatt output than you would with a system that has a higher voltage, as an example. So we'll come back to that because that's an important point. State of charge is important. You want to maintain above that 10%, ideally for long periods of time. LFP batteries are very happy, these lithium ion phosphate batteries, LFP for short, they're very happy to be charged to 100%. They're actually quite happy to be sat at 100% forever, but obviously cycling them is important. I mention about a state of charge greater than 50% because that is a variable that the BMS uses. We'll dig into that in a moment. And these are some examples of recently that I encountered. So the image on the left-hand side is when a Tesla car gets cold. It actually reserves a portion of the state of charge that you can't access until the battery's warmer. That's interesting. And the picture on the right is actually just this afternoon when I was out in the car. I didn't precondition the car, so it was a stone cold car. It had been sat overnight in -2 conditions here. And I'm being limited, as you can see, in kilowatts by what I can regen the vehicle at. So it's limiting the amount of charging that I can do on the car when I lift my foot off the pedal to protect the battery. And cars are a great example of really advanced battery chemistries and battery management systems. They have fantastic thermal management systems as well. They're able to warm the battery from the mains grid to achieve peak performance. They're able to cool the battery when you're charging them fast at a supercharger using the air conditioning circuit. So they can operate, a car can keep its battery in the ideal range by consuming power most of the time, but it can do that very, very well, whereas your mobile phone can't. The Fox batteries, as an example as well, don't have any active thermal management. They're just effectively transmitting their heat into the room, if there is any, but there's not a lot of heat when it comes to this chemistry as well, which is good. But this is just to call out that this isn't a Fox specific issue. Every battery is impacted by extremes in temperatures, and their thermal performance will always be limited. If If you've used a wireless charger on a warm day, you'll notice that sometimes your phone will stop charging if the phone gets too hot. And like I say, cars get impacted. Other things, laptops, they deteriorate very, very quickly. You get a couple of years out of a laptop battery in reality. Same for a mobile phone. Car batteries, you get a much longer lifespan, but they've got all this complex support in order to keep the battery in its optimum space. And solar batteries, you hide them away in your loft, under the stairs, or in your garage or outbuilding, and they're just expected to work. So you want to kind of monitor the battery temperature as the first place to start. The version 2 of the Fox app has the ability, as you can see here, to see the temperature of the batteries. So when I took this picture, they're at 11.9 Celsius and discharging currently with a state of charge over 67%. You could be, there are more analog ways to look at capturing data with maybe a standalone digital temperature probe that you could put on the batteries if you just wanted to be able to glance and see what the room and the outer case of the batteries is at. That's a crude but viable way of getting an idea. If you're able to integrate your inverter into Home Assistant or another advanced automation tool, you'll be able to see your battery temperature in fine-grained detail minute by minute. But understanding what your battery, where your battery is temperature-wise, will help and explain everything else about how your battery is performing its characteristics. So, yeah, we'll cover this. Version 2, go to Site, Device, and then Battery, and you'll see it just to the right-hand side of the battery stack. So the state of charge temperature logic, this is a slide from Fox, and it's really interesting to see there are a couple differences that I wasn't aware of until I really paid attention to this slide. And that's the difference between a version 1 BMS and a version 2. And the only difference I can see is that a version 1 won't allow you to discharge below 3 degrees if the state of charge is under 50%, whereas on the version 2 it's fine. It's allow discharge, allow charge for everything right up until you get to negative Celsius. So if we look at this, we'll focus just on a version 1 because that's going to relate to most people and it's very close to a version 2. But if we look at the graph, we've got -10 as the coldest and +50 as the warmest, with 0 being here. And we can see that charging and discharging is capable right the way through from 1 degree all the way up to 50 Celsius. And that's great. So that's just a binary, will it charge, will it discharge answer. And you can see that as we go under 1 degree, you can't charge and you can discharge for a little bit, but it all depends on where your state of charge is. So if you're under 0, you can't charge and you can't discharge if you're below 50%, but if you're above 50%, you can have a small amount of discharge energy from the battery below 0. So it effectively stops you from charging below 0, and it's heavily rate limited below 3 degrees. And that's basically what most people see and experience, is the batteries going offline when they get very, very cold. And again, this is just to protect them, completely normal. An easier diagram to look at is this one, again kindly provided by Fox, that shows the optimum position being around 25 degrees Celsius. If you're at 25 degrees Celsius, the chemistry is performing the best. And you can see this is amps, so 50 amps, which is most inverters' maximum output, all the way up to 90% state of charge, where it then starts to limit. And that's actually because the battery is nearly full, so it starts to ramp down the charging current as to not overshoot and damage the battery. So 25, you can see it's, you basically go over up to 45 Celsius before you really notice any impact, which is great. and you can see as we go down, the amps reducing. Now the amps is important because if you've got a large battery stack, you will not be using 50 amps to charge them. So I've got my battery stack is 440 volts, and I'm charging, I think, at something like 15 or 17 amps at full speed, and that's because my voltage enables the capabilities of the battery to be far greater than that of my inverter. So I'm really only limited by the inverter. If you've got two HV2600s or two Myra 25s or the smallest stack of ECS, so one master, one slave, you're going to be using all of the amps in order to achieve normal performance. So to achieve 3.7 or 5 kilowatt charge and discharge that's going to be a problem. So with two HV2600s, you can only achieve around 3.6, 3.7 kilowatts of charging, even on a 5 kilowatt inverter, because you're going to be limited by the charging amps because your voltage is so low. So I have a theory, and it has only just occurred to me today when I was looking at this content. I think the reason why half the group are saying cold weather's not a problem, my batteries are working great, and the other half of the group are saying my batteries are heavily rate limited, I'm down to, it will only discharge at 500 watts. I think it's all to do with the battery setups you have. I'll do a poll, people can vote, but I think the people with larger battery packs aren't noticing it because they're not needing to utilize the same number of amps to charge and discharge. Those with smaller battery capacities with lower voltages are going to really be working those batteries hard with high amps because the voltage is low. Hence, are going to be seeing a more extreme reaction as the temperatures fall. So I'm interested in your feedback. Comment below if you've got a large battery pack and don't notice the thermal problems as much, or if you've got a small battery pack and the moment it starts to turn a little bit cold for a few days, you're seeing that impact on your charge and discharge rates. This is the official documentation or notice from Fox. I'll allow you to pause the video to read it, but effectively saying that although some of the battery types like the ECSs, they are rated for IP65 so they can be used indoors or outdoors. Bear in mind, if you put them outdoors or in an area that's not heated or has any warmth, then you will start to have these thermal challenges. You'll notice that as the battery cools, your performance of the battery will decrease. Not necessarily capacity, but capacity that you can access is going to be decreasing. They'll be less performant, and they'll start to charge and discharge slower, all the way down to if they become close to zero or below, they're gonna go offline. Your batteries will effectively report as offline, and you'll get BMS type errors. So recommendations. First of all, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I'm a big believer in being data driven and making changes in a scientific manner. So because you've read someone has insulated their batteries or wrapped a sleeping blanket around them, whatever I've read people have done, doesn't mean that you necessarily need to. I would only try to make a change if you are being impacted and you can back that up by things that you observe, such as the temperature in the app. When it falls to a certain temperature, you notice that your charge discharge rates start to be reduced, and then you can move on. But if you're not noticing a problem, like many users aren't, don't worry about it. Don't optimize for the sake of it. The environment. Is it possible that you can do something about the environment where the batteries are? So if you are a prospective customer, try to avoid putting the batteries somewhere that is cold and heated if you can. There are a lot of batteries installed in lofts that aren't heated, so they're above the insulation layer. They can get quite cold. In garages, outbuildings. If you've got an all-in-one system that's sat on a concrete slab on the side of your house but is outdoors and exposed, you're going to notice this more than other people in terms of the thermal effect and the charge rates, reducing the discharge rates. So if you can position them in an environment that's better, such as an understairs or basement, somewhere, an unused room, somewhere that isn't going to see negative Celsius, that would be great. Again, not a hard requirement. Just understand that if you put it in your loft or somewhere that isn't heated, that you may be impacted a little bit by this temperature behavior that all batteries have. You can add more batteries. So if insulating and moving the batteries or having it installed in a place that's undesirable isn't going to work, then you can increase your voltage by adding more batteries, and that's going to give you more output for the same amps, because the output is amps times volts. So if you add a battery or two, you may notice that you're now above the threshold where the cooler batteries are now no longer showing themselves as any they're not manifesting as a problem. Insulate them using a suitable material. We'll come back to that one. And when you do insulate them, make sure that there's ventilation. The manual suggests 300 millimeters recommended. Some people have done less than that, some people have done more than that. I've insulated a room at the back of my garage, but it's a large room, probably 3 by 3 meters, and I've insulated the roof space in that, and I just closed the door to the main garage area, and that keeps that room warmer than the rest of the garage, which works for me. I'm not having to create boxes to wrap the batteries in, because I'm using the whole room to do that. The risks and the downsides, and the reason I say this is because I have seen some questionable ideas about wrapping blankets and things like that around the batteries. They are an electronic device, they are a chemical reaction, they're very, very safe, and as a type of battery, lithium ion phosphates are not in the news hardly ever that they have thermal runaway or anything like that. But I would treat it like any other electrical appliance, and if you're not actively monitoring it, be very careful about what you use to insulate. There are insulation materials that are fire rated, they don't cost much more. So Rockwool make insulation board that they do one that's not fire retardant, they do one that is. So for a few pounds different, if it was me in my garage or loft space, I would use a material that doesn't combust and will contain anything. I'm not going to put it in a fireproof box like that, because technically the battery already is a fireproof enclosure. It is a metal box that these batteries are in, so that will do any containment. But just be careful about stuff that's combustible around things that aren't necessarily thermally managed with cooling, they're just passively cooled. So choose the right material, or allow enough space where there's plenty of ventilation. These are some of the examples that I think are really good. I've seen them on the group recently, so credit for the pictures to you guys. But they're very neat installs, and you can see there's a variety of shapes and sizes, some of them giving a bit more ventilation. This one on the left here has done a particularly neat job of working around the truss in the loft. I think that's a really neat job. I'm not quite sure what this thing sticking out here is. Be interested to know if you're on the group, comment. But yeah, that's clearly encapsulating some batteries. This again looks like a really nice install with that's some sort of foam board with tape to hold it together. So these are all great, and ideas to keep batteries warmer in colder spaces. But again, I would just pay attention to the ventilation requirements and the suitable materials. So not using something that's combustible or that will melt or do anything like that. You've modified your solar system, and you've probably not told your house insurance that you've modified your solar system. So if this material survives and they do a post-mortem on a loft fire and find that there's materials that aren't normally in I would just be cautious of it. You want something where it's not going to burn, it's going to like smolder or hold its shape. And the best advice as well is to have a smoke alarm, a cheap one, near your install. Again, very low risk of it ever going off because of the type of technology that it is, and it's all in metal boxes. But I think for the sake of a £7 to £10 smoke alarm for that reassurance, that's worthwhile installing it. I believe the latest MCS regs actually require a smoke detection device to be fitted. It didn't used to though in 2021 and before. So insulating is a last resort if you are noticing a thermal performance derating and you can't do any of the above. You can't move the environment or make the environment warmer. You can't add more batteries. I would avoid things like heated mats and things. I've seen a few people recommend those, and I'm always a bit hesitant in jumping on that because they may be temperature controlled, but are you putting that product out of its designed limit? So trying to warm up an entire block, are you overstressing the heat pad? Could the heat pad warm the batteries too much? I don't know. If you feel good about it, you do it. This is only my opinion. Fox say that it has to be within a certain temperature band, and that it has to have adequate ventilation of more than 300 millimeters all the way around. So if you meet the installation criteria, great, there's no problem. But be very careful about things that burn and things that, if they went faulty, could continue to heat. I'd be worried about. So heater fans and things like that, probably not a good idea. They're not long term. You may create further issues by doing that. In terms of some bonus content, I figured it's not actually talked about that much, but it's worth mentioning while we're talking about the impacts of cold weather. There are some positives. So your inverters aren't impacted by cold weather. They'll go down to and still function very happily at -25. And actually with electronics, they normally have increased lifespans if they are operating cooler. So inverters in lofts, for example, in a hot summer, they're going through a bit of torture. I know a number of people have fitted PC fans and things to the tops to help ventilate, and they've seen big improvements. But for inverters, the cold weather in your loft, in your garage, whatever it is, they're very, very happy. They'll continue to work and probably work better and for longer, being slightly cooler. Panel performance actually increases the cooler the panels are. So some people have noticed this. I've seen some posts about it, things like cloud effect, and on a slightly cooler but clearer day, they're getting better performance. That's true. As long as the panels are clear of any debris, ice, snow, they'll actually perform better when they're slightly cooler. Keeping the panels clean and clear, that's important. So I don't obsess about it. I very rarely, maybe once, maximum twice a year, actually clean my panels with a long brush with like what a window cleaner would use with a water connection to it. I don't overly clean them because I'm worried about putting micro scratches in them, or every time you touch them you risk scratching, damaging, cracking. So keep them clean and clear, but I wouldn't obsess about it. And if there's snow on it, I'm not one of these people that goes out and tries to clean the snow off my solar panels. They're normally black. They'll warm up just by being connected and being in the sun. You normally find solar panels will de-ice faster than the rest of the roof. So if you can, if it's a low level bungalow or garage and you want to get the brush out and clear snow off, but what are you clearing it off for? If it's in the winter, it's still going to be fairly poorly performing anyway, just because of the time of year. Avoid thermal shock. So this works both ways. So in the summer, I will clean my panels on a cooler morning before the sun comes up, I won't look at them in the afternoon in the peak of the heat in a July afternoon and go, do you know what, I could do with cleaning these panels, because I don't want to risk damaging the panels through cracking because of thermal shock. When the panels are colder, they're going to be more sensitive, so just keep that in mind if you are thinking about buying a brush extension and cleaning the panels yourself, that you want to do it not when it's freezing cold, not when it's boiling hot, but on a pretty mild day where the sun isn't out and they're not performing, they're not having to work hard and perform. So that's the kind of end of the talk. To summarize, it's completely normal, affects all batteries in all devices. Lithium iron phosphate is a chemistry that's very stable and gives you all the benefits, with a potential con being the fact that it is a little bit more temperature sensitive than some of the other chemistries. But look after them. Don't do anything crazy when it comes to trying to insulate them, and you'll find that small changes will have a big impact. So if you can raise the room temperature or the area temperature by a couple of degrees, if you're close a door or things like that, that will impact your system performance. If you've got a smaller system and are thinking about upgrading, this is just another benefit of adding more batteries. The fact that you'll get sort of more resilience to the charge current effect that happens by the BMS when it detects colder batteries. You'll not notice this issue at all or as much. But yeah, any comments, please shoot a message in the comments of the video or in the Facebook group. Thank you very much.